Oh boy, I sure do love working on this unnecessarily large project that I do not have the time to work on. Oh, give me a second. What? The Orb just announced a new album? And they're already giving out a bunch of info about it? And it's coming out in 3 months? And it could possibly be their last album ever? Well, I guess this project can wait. Let's talk about the Orb. The Orb is a British electronic music group consisting of Alex Paterson and whoever the hell he decides to work with this half-decade. They specialize in an unholy mixture of several genres like ambient, house, and dub. Some people like to call their music ambient house, but you really can't summarize them with just one conventional genre. To me, they make Orb music. They have a very unique sound no one else does, and that's one of the many reasons why they're so special. The Orb started their life with Alex Paterson and Jimmy Cauty in 1988, but Jimmy would then leave 2 years later. While they didn't release any albums yet, at least we got Space, Chill Out, and Loving You out of it. In 1991, Alex would partner with Chris Weston as well as Youth, Thomas Fellman, Andy Falconer, Steve Hillage, Andy Hughes, and several more. This would not only start the long-running tradition of the Orb officially being 2 to 3 guys, but actually being a large group of collaborators in practice, but also result in their first, and in my opinion, best album, The Orb's Adventures Beyond the Ultra World. This trip into space is packed to the brim with all-time classic tracks featuring timeless production, awesome beats, and amazing ambient soundscapes. It instantly set in stone a musical identity for the Orb. The next year, the Orb would release a highly successful 40-minute single, and then followed up with their second album, UF Orb. While it still focused on the concept of space, it somehow had a completely revamped and even more ahead of its time sound, and even though it isn't as good as their debut, it's still a fantastic record. After those and a few other projects, Chris Weston would leave, but the Orb would continue to make more music. Particular highlights from the 90s are their next 2 albums, Orbis Terrarum and Orblivion. Both were yet again completely new revamps of the Orb sound, the former being composed of dense earthy ambience and containing my favorite Orb song of all time in Plateau. Meanwhile, the latter is comprised of incredibly chaotic yet also somewhat poppy songs. Both of these albums I would definitely recommend listening to. This is all to say that the first decade of the Orb's existence was a very wild one. But what happened next? Well, a few things happened, but I don't want this to become a feature-length documentary, so all you need to know to understand this new album is that the current era of the Orb with the lineup of Michael Rendall, Alex Paterson, and his neck started with their 15th studio album, No Sounds Are Out of Bounds. Coming out in 2018, this album was far more diverse than some of their previous work, branching out into new territories like whatever the fuck Wolfbane is and... Wait. Oh my god. Is that a pop song? The album's okay, but I'll be honest and say I haven't listened to it that much. However, I really do like the closer, Soul Planet. Then in 2020, they released Abolition of the Royal Familia. It built off the sounds of the previous album and I'll just get right to the point, I fucking love it. I'll admit that it's stupid how the whole political message this album's apparently all about is completely absent from the music. I also might be a bit biased because it was the first modern Orb album I heard when I was first getting into them, but I also think it just has a lot of amazing songs on it. It also has a very unique structure, separating the album into 4 distinct sections of dance, ambient, dub, and ambient again. This inspired me to do a somewhat similar thing on my album Venus. A year later, Alex Paterson would start a record label for some of his other collaborative works. A few things have been released on it, but the only one I've gotten to so far is The Heavens, which is a good album, my favorite off of it being Afterlife Aftershave. Then we'd get our first bit of info about the next album in 2022. However, weirdly enough, this wasn't an actual announcement. It was a post made to the Orb's Facebook page in which, after mentioning NFTs, record label bullshit, and the Russians, Alex says that the Orb will die after one more album. This was very shocking, to say the least, but what's weird about it is the fact that this was just never expanded upon. Like, I looked at every post on the Facebook page after that, as well as the website and a bunch of press regarding this new album, and this whole last album thing was just never explicitly mentioned again. And I don't mean to be rude, but if I was the leader of a popular music thing and I wanted to end it after 30 plus years, I think I'd mention it more than once. So basically, I don't know what to make of this. Despite all that though, I, as well as many others, were hyped for the new Orb record, and we get our first real look at it in January of this year when it was announced. You saw my reaction to that earlier. And throughout the 3 months between that and the release, we got a lot of info about this album, including a track list with brief descriptions of each song, as well as a very generous 4 singles from a 9-track record. And quite the 9 songs these were going to be, because from the descriptions and the singles alone, it was made very clear that this album was going to be just as, if not even more diverse than the previous 2. This was even reflected in the album's name, Prism. Pun intended. And speaking of the title, as John Garrett of Pop Matters said, it's very weird that the Orb haven't used a title like this before, considering all the sounds they've associated themselves with throughout the years. However, it's definitely an apt title for this one. This whole Prism thing can also be seen in the album's cover, which is a very obvious reference to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, especially considering the fact that Prism came out just over 50 years after it. Honestly, it's just nice to see the Orb reference a different Pink Floyd album for once. But enough about that, it's time to actually get into the album. However, I first want to bring up the fact that instead of using short snippets from each song like I did in my last edited video, I will instead be using footage from my first listen to Prism, so you'll not only be getting my current opinions on it, but also my first experience with it. Okay, so it is April 28th, and the album just came out, and I'm going to listen to it for the first time, and I have listened to 4 of its 9 tracks, because, you know, they released 4 already before it came out, so I have listened to those for the most part, but the rest of it's new, and I still haven't listened to those 4 tracks that much, so it's a newish experience, so yeah. Also, just keep in mind that I am nowhere near a professional music critic, and that everything I say in this video is a product of my very subjective opinion. But now that everything's out of the way, let's go. We start with H.O.M.E. I'll give you a few seconds to guess what it stands for. Okay, now if you guessed High Orbs Mini Earth, you'd be correct, you cheating fuck. This was the 3rd single to come out for the album, accompanied by a music video entirely composed of AI-generated imagery. Now, AI music videos are far from a new thing. Hell, even I beat the Orb to it if you count using 5 DALL-E 2 images as an AI music video. Some people might see this as the Orb trying to be trendy since AI images are all the rage now, but nah, this is definitely up their alley. And also, cheap as hell. That's not to say anything bad about this music video though, since I really do like it, especially the way the camera smoothly pans over the constantly shifting sci-fi landscape. As for the song itself, it creates a similarly dreamy soundscape right off the bat that's sweet and full of little details. Yeah, this is a nice intro. A particularly interesting part of this 4-minute intro is the psychedelic poetry by Alex, which frequently cites the song's title. That violin in the background is also a very nice touch. This is reminding me of Paterson.
Ponds splashing in. High orbs, mini Earth.
Soon after some build-up, the song shifts into this awesome, incredibly lush house section. It's got a lot of stuff going on, like whatever the hell that one vocal sample in the middle is. Here comes this voice sample. I can't tell if I like or dislike the use of this voice sample. It's like kind of weird. After several listens, I decided that I do in fact like it despite its crudeness. However, what I don't like here is that one part where they put in an annoying effect on the bass line. No clue why that's there. Oh, this is a change. Eventually, the house section fades away to an ambient outro, similar to the first one, but thankfully not 4 minutes long. Actually, this section's kind of more on the creepy side. The intro was also a little creepy. This one's a bit more. Overall, this is a great opener to the album. The ambient sections are a very interesting listen, and I am just a huge sucker for lush housey stuff like this, which makes the whole song a very lovely journey to go on. Next up is the concisely titled, Why Can You Be in Two Places at Once When You're Not Anywhere at All? Where's Gary mix. This was the last single to come out literally the day before the album was released. Like, I literally watched its music video on YouTube while it was still unlisted. Speaking of said music video, it's once again AI generated, but instead of sci-fi landscapes, we now have monochromatic and heavily hallucinogen-induced imagery. using videos and pictures as a base so it's only mostly incomprehensible instead of completely incomprehensible. Once again, I'm ragging on it, but I also think it's a cool watch. The song itself is similarly psychedelic with its prominent use of acid, but also really fun with its funky groove and energetic melodies. Yeah, this is the good part. It's a nice, trippy, and bombastic listen. It's just a very fun track. The only aspect of the song that I dislike is definitely the vocal samples from which the Where's Gary and the title come from. They only ever appear twice, and I can tell they were included for shits and giggles, but they're pretty distracting. Where the fuck is Gary? Although at least on some listens I'm able to have fun with them. He fucking died? What the hell was that? Oh my god, I can't believe Gary fucking died. Oh. So Why Can You Be in Two Places at Once When You're Not Anywhere at All is yet another great track in my opinion. I love listening to it, and starting the album with this and Home just goes to show that this album is going to be all over the damn place. The third track is a Ghetto love story, also known as the song that caused the wonky angle to die of cringe. It starts but also ends with a short but beautiful ambient section. I like the intro. This is a nice intro. But after the intro, it then quickly shifts into this fun, upbeat, and poppy reggae song about a love story that, surprise surprise, involves a ghetto. The instrumental is good, but the main focus of the track are the vocals by Eric Walker, and to be honest, they're kind of adorable. Like, the ghetto part of the title is definitely there, but for the most part it's just a cute story about two young people in love despite being completely out of each other's league. Oh, so this is an actual ghetto love story. I wasn't expecting it to be literal. Some people might see the vocals and subject matter as cheesy or a bit cringe, but I'm pretty resistant to both, or maybe I'm just cringe too, but what I'm trying to say here is that personally doesn't bother me. Oh, he said the thing. The song is also very catchy too. Like the phrases "nobody would ever call me your wifey" and "your daddy don't know what I know" are definitely going to be forever ingrained in my head from now on. However, despite all that, there isn't much special to this song. While it is cool to finally see the Orbs say "fuck it, let's do reggae," it doesn't stand out much on its own as a reggae song. However, I can't get angry at this song though. Bottom line is that while a ghetto love story isn't as good as the previous two tracks, I still like it. Keeping up with this current run of fun dubby psychedelics, we have Picking Tea Leaves and Chasing Butterflies. It has yet another short ambient intro, but once the song gets going it basically sounds exactly like what you'd imagine from the title. It's warm, sunny, carefree, it's basically the perfect soundtrack for chilling out in a garden, while on a shit ton of acid. Ooh. In essence, this is like Why Can You Be, but more laid back. Also, the bass line by Youth is great, but that's basically like saying the sun is bright. It always is. There are even a few smaller moments that I like for whatever reason, like the part with the dub delay. Ooh. I like that. I like that part. Or the sample at the end. That's the song. But those meowing noises are an inclusion that I don't understand at all. Just like the Where's Gary samples, they're distracting. There's meowing sounds in the background, alright. Despite all that, I honestly think that while Picking Tea Leaves and Chasing Butterflies is an okay song, it's the one track on Prism that stands out the least. That's not to say a vibey song like this is a bad thing, though. You need low energy moments to make the high energy moments even more impactful and fresh. It's called pacing, and the Orb have shown they can do it very well. But Picking Tea Leaves and Chasing Butterflies is just not that interesting either. It has a nice aesthetic, yes, but it just leaves me wanting something more out of it, you know? I'm hoping I'm not the only one thinking this, but honestly, a voice in the back of my head is telling me that I'm probably just too sober. So overall, decent track. So far in Prism, we've been seeing this weird trend of the last few tracks getting less and less interesting. But luckily this changes right here, midway through the album, with Tiger. This track gets its name from the nickname of Alex Paterson's late brother, as well as the real name of Alex's son, and it's basically the one pop song on this album. This is something that's become a bit of tradition over the past several years. I mean, every recent Orb album needs a pop song. Things would just be way too coherent without one. I kid, of course. I've actually really liked the Orb's recent ventures into pop, especially Days, and I think Tiger definitely makes a very nice addition to the list. It spends its first 40 seconds building up with small vocal snippets scattered about. I like the start. And then suddenly the chorus just comes out of nowhere and hits you like a fucking train. It's amazing. Ooh. The vocals on this track are done by Andy Kane, who did an amazing job on the first two tracks of Abolition of the Royal Familia. He once again turns in a great performance here, conveying a lot of emotion through Tiger's motivational yet a little generic lyrics. This wasn't a single? The song has a simple structure after that, but really the main focus is the chorus, which is definitely the best part of the song, if not the entire album. The only thing I dislike about Tiger are some of the vocal samples they throw in there. Now, I want to make it very clear I don't hate random vocal samples. They are an essential part to the Orb sound, and most of the time they add to a song's atmosphere, but that just hasn't been the case for a few tracks on this album. Like here on Tiger, we have this groovy, bombastic, and energetic song, yet at random points we just hear this guy in the background say, "Good health, high noon, Tiger," and most importantly, "Good night, Jimbo."
Good night, Jimbo.
Good night to you too. We still have half an album left. This stuff could work on a more outwardly goofy track, but they definitely don't fit here. Although they can be annoying at the worst of times, they don't ruin Tiger for me. I love this track despite its flaws I just mentioned, and I can safely say I'll definitely be adding it to karaoke night. Just kidding. I'm an Orb fan, I don't have friends to go out with. Anyways, next song. It's been a total of 4 minutes and 33 seconds of time in the album since the last Dubby Psychedelic song, so you know what that means. It's time for another one, and this one is called Dragon of the Ocean Dogon Mix. I'm pretty sure the Dogon part of the title comes from the Dogon people of Mali, and if you're familiar with conspiracy theories like I am, then, woo boy, they are interesting to say the least. As for the actual song, like Tiger, Dragon of the Ocean does a really good job at building up to the start of the song with its hazy horns and choir. Interesting opening.
Those were the days when we picked northern spies and baldwins, both of which lasted all
Oh, I thought I was about to start there. I like that. However, the song is more similar to picking tea leaves and chasing butterflies in every other respect. But there are two core parts of the song that make it stand out in a good way, while the other didn't. First is that it has the best bass line on the album. Thanks, youth. That is one bass line, I gotta say. Second is that Eric Walker has returned to do vocals on this track as well. What's he singing about? Your answer is as good as mine. As far as I can tell, something about counting dragons, the ocean being mine, and getting higher. I could make a weed joke, but that's just low-hanging fruit. Something I find annoying though is the vocal effect on Eric's voice, which, while not prominent, is still noticeable. Despite being 6 minutes, this song feels a lot shorter, possibly because of its minute-long intro and outro. Speaking of said outro though, I actually really like it. It's very relaxing and oddly reminiscent of OOBE from UF Orb. I like this. Overall, Dragon of the Ocean is pretty good, and it's honestly what picking tea leaves and chasing butterflies should have been. Have you ever listened to a song for the first time and something about it just immediately clicked with you really intensely, yet you have no idea why it did? Well, that's me with this next song, The Beginning of the End. Now, some fans of the Orb might find that title to sound really familiar, and there's a reason why, as the first track off of No Sounds Are Out of Bounds is called The End of the End. As far as I can tell, there's absolutely no connection between these two songs. They're not even the same genre, so I'm just going to assume that Alex is running out of song titles after 30 years. Anyways, back to the song itself. It is the second house song on this album, and the reason why I fell in love with it, like, instantly, can be seen right in the first few seconds. Ooh, okay. 5 seconds in, I like the beginning of the end already. Once again, I don't really know why, but those synths just hit me right here. I fucking love those synths so much. Oh my god. I guess I just have a really big soft spot for tender melodies like that, and also that's the reason why I felt the need to clarify this is just my opinion in the intro, because I just get weirdly excited by small things like that. That's not to say it's the only great thing about this song, though. The beats, atmosphere, and all the little melodies they throw on top are just amazing. Altogether, it makes me feel like I'm watching the sunset just seconds before it goes beneath the horizon, which is a melancholy that I really, really like. There's only 2 prominent vocal samples on this song, a lot less than usual. One of them is a deep voice that repeats the name of the song. I hope it's not the end, this shit's good. And the other is a recording from an airline. What is the sample? The latter one is pretty weird, but not that bad. In the end, I absolutely love the beginning of the end. Yes, it's mostly for an oddly specific reason, and I'm probably the only person who feels this strongly about this song, but it is my most favorite track on Prism. We're now at the penultimate track, which is Living in Recycled Times. It not only has a very accurate title, but was also the first single to come out for this album. Like the first 2 tracks, this one got a music video, not made from AI-generated imagery, but rather stock footage? Yeah, what I find weird about this music video is the fact that it's seemingly a compilation of stock footage with minor visual effects, although I haven't been able to confirm if it actually is stock footage. Even then, I feel like it leads to a rather unimpressive music video with a lack of a central focus. However, Fongaboo, the mod of the orbs subreddit, brought up to me the fact that the stock footage may have been used on purpose to reflect the title. After all, if all of today's media can just recycle stuff from the past, then the orb can do the same thing for a music video. It's a really interesting observation, but I'm still not a fan of the video though. However, the most interesting aspect of this track is not the music video, but rather the fact it's a drum and bass song. I said before that the Orb have tackled many different sounds throughout their existence, but drum and bass is definitely not one of them. However, that's not to say they've never dabbled in it before. Queen of Hearts from Abolition of the Royal Familia and Mickey Mars from U of Off being 2 good examples. But this is probably the closest they've gotten to pure drum and bass. Before that, though, is a minute-long intro which has a very sweet sound with its tender drones and echoey vocal snippets. Yeah, but this is nice. This is nice. Soon this ambient swells as a drum and bass beat fades in. After a sample of these horn stabs, the song really starts as Rachel Darcy comes in singing about love, life, and destiny. The real focus of this section is on the beats though, which are good. Yeah, this part's good. I like this part too. And actually, for the most part, I think the whole drum and bass section is pretty good, but for some reason it's never impressed me that much. I have started to like this section more on recent listens, probably due to the added context of the album as well as the intro and outro, but I've never been that big of a fan of it. However, there is that one part that I really like. Oh yeah, and this part here has always stood out to me for some reason. I don't know why. Eventually, the drum and bass section slowly moves into a 4.5-minute ambient outro. This might be an unpopular opinion, but this section is the best part of the song. It's just an absolutely lovely continuation of the soundscape from the song's intro. I forgot about that violin. Ooh. I appreciate all the little weird details they put in there as well. Okay. This is probably going to sound like really weird, but this section reminds me of looking at a jar of pond water. Like, the calming atmosphere is the water, and all the little things going on are the creatures swimming around. There's probably a better way to describe it, but to put it simply, I love it. And then finally we arrive at the closer and title track, Prism. It's a lengthy ambient piece, which, just like the pop song, every recent Orb album has come to have, especially at the end or near the end of the album. And while this one is relatively shorter than ones seen on previous albums, clocking in at just under 10 minutes, it still packs an equally emotional punch. This was the second single to come out for the album because only the Orb were brave enough to do something like that, but it didn't get a fancy video or anything, just a nice visual. This song isn't as easy to talk about as the other songs here though, because it isn't structured like the others, but rather a beautifully ethereal soundscape where stuff sometimes happens. Right at the beginning, when the atmosphere is starting to develop, there's a sample talking about the 1972 World Chess Championship and how it echoed the tensions of the Cold War, which, while not developed upon, is an interesting choice.
The moves of Bobby Fischer, the American challenger who bewildered everyone, including his opponent, champion Boris Spassky of Russia, by his failure to show up.
He is real. Another notable part is when the song climaxes halfway through. Everything starts to swell and the trumpet comes in playing some really high notes. It's an amazing moment, although I honestly think it would be a bit better without the trumpet. Besides those two moments, this track is purely blissful and spacious ambience, very reminiscent of Afro's Afghans and Angels from Abolition of the Royal Familia. It's a great listen, and if this whole last album thing sadly turns out to be true, then this makes for a very good farewell. The Orb would basically be saying goodbye in the best way they know how. Oh, these guys know how to do their ambient closers. Know how to do it well. And that's Prism. Not just the song, but the entire album. And now that I'm done going through each track individually, I want to look at how different people have reacted to the album, starting with the fans. Now, it's actually pretty hard to find a consensus here since it just seems like no two Orb fans think alike. Outside of our mutual praise for the first two albums, it seems like us Orb fans just love disagreeing on which albums are good or not. But from the general impressions I got, expectations were hopeful. Now that Prism's out, I'm seeing a lot of positive responses, even some praise from fans. As for actual professional critics and people who know what they're talking about, for the most part, they're rating Prism in the 6 to 8 out of 10 range, an unforgiving place people like to call good. And then when it comes to myself, I didn't really know what to expect of Prism before it came out. As I said before, I'm a big fan of Abolition of the Royal Familia, so I was excited to see something that looked like it was going to be in the same vein. However, I wanted to be realistic and not hype up myself too much for this album. However, when I listened to it for the first time, I found it to be great. Wow. They've done it again. But yeah, great album. I was actually kind of, well, I wasn't exactly worried, but I was like, oh, I don't know, it might not be as good as I want it to be, but no, it's a great album. I can't really pick a favorite track at the moment. Tiger really stuck out to me first listen though, and none of these tracks are bad, I gotta say. None of these tracks are bad. Really only like ones that I don't vibe with too much is Picking Tea Leaves and Chasing Butterflies, and maybe Living in Recycled Times, but I don't know, I'm gonna have to give this like plenty of more listens to really like come to a final say on what tracks are the best or worst, but yeah, this is definitely a great album. And now that I have listened to it plenty of more times, I can confidently say that it has met my expectations. Is it as good as Adventures Beyond the Ultra World or UF Orb? Is it as good as a recent favorite of mine, An Abolition of the Royal Familia? Well, it's close, but I don't think so either. But trust me when I say that this is a great album. If I had to give it a rating out of 10, I think an 8.5 would be fair. And if I had to put it into a ranking of the Orb albums that I'm confident enough in to rank, then it would look like this, with Prism barely getting over Orbis Terrarum to land in the top half. As I've mentioned before, I really like a lot of these tracks, and just overall, I didn't mention it much before, but the production here is amazing. A lot of these tracks sound like $1 million. This album is also very consistent quality-wise. There's tracks that are weaker, but there's nothing that I would call straight up bad. The consistency is even more impressive when you consider how diverse this album is. In just 70 minutes, the Orb cover ambient, house, dub, reggae, pop, and drum and bass, all of which are done very well. I've seen some critics criticize this album's diversity, but I think they're missing the point. The Orb have been taking this anything goes approach to music for years now, and that's clearly shown in the title. And anyways, a musically inconsistent album isn't always a bad thing, just like how a musically consistent album isn't always a good thing. I've also seen some people criticize a lot of the obvious stoner influences on this album. I've already made several jokes about it, and the Orb definitely makes it very obvious. I mean, before the album was even announced, an early version of Tiger was used in an ad for Orb branded weed. I'm not joking. While I understand why this can come off as annoying to others, I don't really mind it. Overall, my favorite track on Prism is The Beginning of the End, with other tracks like Home, Why Can You Be, Tiger, and the title track coming close behind. However, this album is not perfect. I've already mentioned several times before that vocal samples are occasionally used in very distracting ways, and I also think that the song structure of ambient intro, song, and ambient outro that sounds the same is used a few too many times on this album in a way that it soon becomes predictable. There also seems to be less genre bending here than usual. The Orb are very well known for how they can blend and contort different genres of music, but for the most part here, individual sections stay within their conventional genre boundaries. Overall, my least favorite track is Picking Tea Leaves and Chasing Butterflies, with Dragon of the Ocean close behind. Yeah, I know I said the latter was an improvement over the former, but admittedly not by that much. A Ghetto Love Story and Living in Recycled Times are very interesting additions to the Orb's discography that I do like. However, I wouldn't consider them highlights on this album either. So, in summary, Prism is a great album that finds its strengths in the sheer volume of genres it explores and a consistent track list with several songs that have quickly become new favorites of mine. However, it can be inhibited at times due to distracting sampling decisions, predictability, and weaker dub songs. If this truly is the Orb's last album, then obviously it's going to be a shame. But hey, you have to admit that this is a nice note to leave off on. I really enjoyed my time with this album, and I think you will too, so I recommend you listen to it. Also, where the fuck is Gary?